Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of history's most brutal experiences, spending 24 hours as a medieval prisoner. Picture this. You're lying on a stone floor so cold it feels like it's sucking the warmth directly from your bones, surrounded by the stench of human waste and despair. The only light filtering through your cell comes from a tiny barred window high above, casting shadows that dance across walls stained with God knows what. You probably won't survive this experience if we're being historically accurate. But hey, that's medieval justice for you, efficient in its cruelty, if nothing else. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing our little global community come together for these historical adventures. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you as consciousness creeps back isn't sight or sound, it's the cold. Medieval prisons, or jails as they were called, were typically built in the lowest levels of castles, towers, or purpose-built structures, where the earth itself seemed to conspire against human comfort. You're lying on what passes for a floor, rough-hewn stone blocks that have been worn smooth by countless bodies before yours, each one polished by the oil of human skin and the salt of tears. Your body aches in ways you didn't know were possible. Medieval prisoners often developed what modern doctors would recognize as severe arthritis and joint problems from sleeping on stone floors. The human body simply wasn't designed to rest on surfaces that hard, and after just a few nights, your hips, shoulders, and spine have already begun their slow rebellion against your circumstances. The sound that finally pulls you fully into wakefulness is the scrape of metal against stone, the jailer's key ring dragging against the wall as he makes his morning rounds. This isn't the gentle wake-up call you're used to. Medieval jailers or jailers were often former soldiers or local toughs who saw their position as both profit opportunity and entertainment. They weren't paid regular wages by the crown or local authorities. Instead, they made their living by charging prisoners for everything from food to clean straw to the privilege of having their chains loosened. You can hear him approaching, his footsteps echoing in the stone corridor with a rhythm that's become as familiar as your own heartbeat. Each step brings with it the metallic jingle of keys, the creak of leather boots, and occasionally the whistle of some tune that feels obscenely cheerful in this place of misery. Medieval prisons were designed to break spirits as much as bodies, and the psychological torture began the moment you woke up. The air around you is thick with humidity and the accumulated breath of too many bodies in too small a space. Historians still argue whether medieval prisons were intentionally designed to be this uncomfortable, or if the conditions were simply a byproduct of the technology and materials available at the time. What's clear is that ventilation was an afterthought at best, and the air circulation in most medieval prisons was practically non-existent. Your cellmates because you're almost certainly not alone in this stone box, are beginning to stir as well. The medieval prison system operated on a principle of economy. Why waste space on individual cells when you could pack multiple prisoners into each available space? The result was a human storage system that would make modern sardine cans look spacious. You're sharing this roughly 8 by 10 foot cell with anywhere from 3 to 7 other people, depending on the current prisoner population and the whims of whoever's in charge. Hierarchy of space allocation follows a brutal logic that you've already learned to navigate. The spots closest to the walls are premium real estate. They offer something solid to lean against and a bit of protection from the foot traffic that happens when people need to relieve themselves in the corner that serves as the communal latrine. The center of the cell is where the newest arrivals end up, exposed to kicks and stumbles from all directions, with no protection from the elements or fellow prisoners. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you can make out the faces of your companions in misfortune. There's the pickpocket who's been here for 3 months waiting for his trial, the merchant accused of using false weights, the woman who allegedly practiced witchcraft by knowing too much about herbal remedies, and the peasant who couldn't pay his lord's taxes. Medieval prisons were remarkably democratic in their misery. They brought together people from all walks of life under one roof of shared suffering. The jailer's footsteps have stopped outside your cell now, and you can hear the familiar ritual beginning. He's checking to make sure everyone's still alive, not out of compassion, but because dead prisoners don't generate revenue. The medieval prison system was essentially a private business venture, and keeping your inventory breathing was just good economics. The jailer's morning inspection begins with a head count, and you instinctively shift into a position that makes you visible, but not prominent. Medieval prisoners quickly learned that drawing attention to yourself was rarely a good idea, especially during the daily rituals that determined whether you'd eat, whether you'd be moved to a different cell, or whether you'd face questioning that day. Up, you miserable lot, comes the gravelly voice through the iron bars. It's the same greeting every morning, delivered with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. You struggle to your feet, joints protesting with pops and creaks that sound unnaturally loud in the small space. The human body's morning stiffness is amplified tenfold when you've spent the night on stone, and standing upright becomes a small victory worth celebrating. The first order of business is relieving yourself, and this is where medieval prison life reveals its most degrading aspects. Privacy is a luxury that disappeared the moment you were shoved through that cell door. The corner of your cell that serves as the communal toilet is nothing more than a slight depression in the floor with a small drain that may or may not actually drain anywhere useful. The smell is indescribable, a combination of human waste, stagnant water, and something that might charitably be called decomposition. Medieval prisons operated on what historians call the self-maintenance model, meaning prisoners were expected to handle their own waste disposal, food preparation, and general hygiene. The problem was that no one had actually thought through how this would work in practice. The result was a system that would make a modern septic tank look like a spa. You've learned to time your bowel movements carefully. The best strategy is to wait until after the morning inspection, but before the midday heat makes the smell even worse. Your cellmates have developed their own schedules too, creating an unspoken bathroom timetable that governs part of your daily routine. It's amazing how quickly human beings can adapt to circumstances that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. The lack of toilet paper is something modern minds can barely comprehend. Medieval prisoners used whatever was available: straw, cloth scraps, their own clothing if they were desperate enough. The wealthy occasionally managed to smuggle in rags or pieces of linen, but these were treasured commodities that were hoarded and rationed like gold. You've learned to be creative with the limited resources available, and you've stopped thinking about how your great-grandmother would react to your current hygiene standards. Water for washing is a daily negotiation with the jailer. Clean water costs money, and money is something most prisoners don't have. The wealthy can afford to have servants bring them washing water, clean clothes, and even small luxuries like soap. The poor make do with whatever rainwater they can catch in cupped hands near the window, or the occasional splash from the communal drinking bucket. Medieval soap was a luxury item even for free people, made from animal fat and lye in a process that was both time-consuming and expensive. In prison, soap was rarer than rubies. Most prisoners went weeks or months without any kind of cleansing agent, relying instead on cold water and vigorous scrubbing with rough cloth to remove the worst of the accumulated grime. Your teeth are another daily concern that medieval life makes exponentially worse. Without proper nutrition, dental problems develop quickly, and in a world before fluoride or proper dental care, a toothache could easily become a life-threatening infection. Some prisoners chew on small twigs or pieces of rough cloth to try to clean their teeth, but mostly you've learned to accept that dental hygiene is another casualty of your circumstances. The morning washing ritual reveals the full extent of your physical deterioration. Your skin has taken on a grayish pallor that comes from lack of sunlight and proper nutrition. Medieval prisoners often developed a condition called prison pallor, a distinct sickly complexion that marked them as clearly as any brand. Your fingernails are black with grime that no amount of scrubbing seems to remove, and your hair has become a matted, oily mess that defies all attempts at grooming. Historians still argue whether medieval authorities deliberately used poor hygiene as a form of psychological torture, or if the conditions were simply a byproduct of overcrowding and limited resources. What's clear is that the degradation of personal cleanliness was one of the most effective ways to break down a prisoner's sense of self-worth and dignity. The irony isn't lost on you that some of history's most fastidious people, medieval nobility, who bathed regularly and wore clean linen, ended up in the same squalid conditions as everyone else when they fell from grace. Prison was the great equalizer, reducing everyone to the same basic level of human misery regardless of their previous station in life. As the morning ablutions conclude, you're left with the familiar feeling of being simultaneously exhausted and wide awake. The physical discomfort of your unwashed body is matched only by the psychological discomfort of knowing this is just the beginning of another day in paradise. The sound of the jailer's key in the lock signals the beginning of the day's most important negotiation, breakfast. And by breakfast, we mean the complex economic and social dance that determines whether you'll have anything to eat at all today. Medieval prisons operated on a pay-as-you-go system that would make modern subscription services look generous. Everything costs money, and if you don't have money, you don't eat. The jailer opens the door just wide enough to slide in the day's food offerings, assuming there are any. What passes for breakfast in medieval prison would make airplane food look like a gourmet feast. You're looking at a piece of bread that's seen better days, possibly better decades, and a small portion of what might charitably be called porridge. The bread is the dark, coarse variety that was typically fed to animals, made from whatever grain was cheapest and most available. Often this included barley, oats, or even ground peas mixed with flour. Medieval prison bread was notorious for its, let's call them, additional ingredients. Historians have found evidence that prison bread often contained sawdust, chalk, and other fillers that helped stretch the expensive grain, but provided no nutritional value. Sometimes you'd find weevils or other insects baked right into the loaf, though many prisoners considered these protein bonuses rather than problems. The porridge is a thin, watery substance that bears only a passing resemblance to anything you might call food. It's made from whatever grain scraps are available, mixed with water and cooked, until it reaches a consistency somewhere between soup and wallpaper paste. The flavor is best described as aggressively bland, with occasional hints of something that might have been salt or might have been dirt. It's genuinely hard to tell the difference. Your stomach growls audibly as you contemplate this feast, and you're reminded that hunger is one of the most effective forms of torture ever devised. Medieval authorities understood that a hungry prisoner was a compliant prisoner, and the food system was designed to keep you on the edge of starvation without actually letting you die. It's a delicate balance that requires careful calculation and absolutely no compassion. The distribution of food follows a strict hierarchy that reflects the prison's social order. The prisoners who can afford to pay for better food get it first, while those who rely on the basic provisions get whatever's left. If you're lucky enough to have family or friends on the outside, they might bring you additional food during visiting hours. If you're unlucky enough to be poor and friendless, you'll learn to make do with whatever scraps fall your way. Water is another daily concern that free people take for granted. The communal drinking bucket contains water that's been sitting in the cell for at least a day, possibly longer. Medieval understanding of water purification was limited at best, and the water you're drinking has likely been contaminated with everything from human waste to dead animals. The taste is metallic and slightly sweet, which experienced prisoners know means it's been sitting too long and developing interesting bacterial cultures. Medieval prisoners often developed what we would now recognize as scurvy, rickets, and other nutritional deficiency diseases. The lack of fresh fruits and vegetables meant that vitamin C was practically non-existent in the prison diet, leading to bleeding gums, loose teeth, and slow-healing wounds. The absence of sunlight meant vitamin D deficiency was common, causing bone weakness and dental problems. You've learned to eat slowly, making each bite last as long as possible. This isn't just about savoring the food, though savoring might be too strong a word for what you're consuming. It's about tricking your stomach into feeling fuller than it actually is, and making the psychological experience of eating last longer than the physical reality of your tiny portion. The breakfast ritual also serves as a daily reminder of your complete dependence on the system. You can't grow your own food, you can't hunt or forage, and you can't even choose when to eat. Every meal is a gift that can be withdrawn at any moment, and the psychological impact of this dependency is almost as debilitating as the physical hunger. Historians still argue whether medieval prison food was intentionally designed to be this terrible, or if it was simply the result of limited budgets and poor understanding of nutrition. What's clear is that the quality of prison food was so notoriously bad that it became a common complaint in legal documents and personal letters from the period. The irony of medieval prison food is that it was often better than what many free peasants ate on a daily basis. The difference was that free peasants had some control over their circumstances. They could forage, hunt small game, or grow small gardens to supplement their diets. Prisoners had no such options, making their limited diet feel more restrictive than it might have been in absolute terms. As you finish your meager breakfast, you're left with the hollow feeling that comes from eating just enough to remind your body that it's hungry, but not enough to actually satisfy that hunger. It's a sensation that will stay with you throughout the day, a constant reminder of your circumstances and your complete dependence on the mercy of others. With breakfast concluded, the social dynamics of your cell begin to assert themselves for the day. Medieval prisons developed their own internal governments, complete with hierarchies, alliances, and power structures that would make political scientists weep with fascination. You're about to spend the next few hours navigating a social system that's both brutally simple and surprisingly complex. The unofficial leader of your cell is a man called Thomas the Blade, though whether that's his real name or prison nickname is unclear. He's been here for 8 months, awaiting trial for highway robbery, and his combination of size, experience, and genuine menace has earned him the respect and fear of his cellmates. In the medieval prison system, leadership positions weren't elected. They were taken by whoever was strong enough to hold them and smart enough to maintain them. Thomas has established what amounts to a primitive taxation system within your 8 by 10 foot kingdom. Anyone who receives food, money, or goods from outside sources owes him a percentage. Call it a protection fee, though protection from what is sometimes unclear. The system works because Thomas provides genuine services. He settles disputes, enforces basic rules about hygiene and behavior, and serves as the primary negotiator with guards and jailers. Next in the hierarchy is Margaret, the herb woman, accused of witchcraft because she knew too much about healing plants and had the audacity to cure people more effectively than the local physician. Her knowledge of herbal remedies has made her invaluable to the prison community, and she's parlayed this expertise into a position of respect and relative security. Medieval prisoners often suffered from various ailments, and anyone who could provide relief from pain or illness automatically gained influence. The merchant, Robert of Canterbury, occupies an interesting position in the social order. He's accused of using false weights in his grain business, but he still has enough connections and resources on the outside to occasionally receive money and supplies. This makes him valuable to Thomas, who protects him in exchange for a steady stream of resources. Medieval prison economics operated on the principle that money could buy almost anything, including safety and comfort. At the bottom of the hierarchy is young Peter, a peasant who couldn't pay his lord's taxes and was imprisoned for debt. He's the newest arrival, having been here only 2 weeks, and he's still learning the rules of this miniature society. Medieval debt imprisonment was common, and debtors often found themselves trapped in a cycle where they couldn't earn money to pay their debts because they were imprisoned for not paying their debts. The daily routine begins with what Thomas calls morning court, where he settles any disputes that arose during the night, assigns daily tasks, and shares any information he's gleaned from the guards or other sources. This morning's agenda includes a disagreement about sleeping arrangements, a debate over water rationing, and the important matter of who gets to sit closest to the window during the day. Medieval prisons were notorious for their internal violence, but your cell has achieved a relatively stable equilibrium through Thomas's leadership and everyone's mutual recognition that cooperation is better than constant conflict. This doesn't mean there's no tension. The combination of hunger, confinement, and uncertainty creates a pressure cooker atmosphere that can explode at any moment. The psychological dynamics of prison life are fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. You've watched grown men cry over a piece of moldy bread, seen friendships form and dissolve over access to sunlight, and witnessed the way prolonged confinement can break down the social barriers that normally separate people. The merchant and the peasant, who would never have spoken to each other in the outside world, now share intimate details of their lives and fears. Margaret has become something of a mother figure to the group, despite being imprisoned for supposedly supernatural crimes. She listens to everyone's complaints about their health, offers what comfort she can, and serves as a mediator when Thomas's more authoritarian style isn't appropriate. Medieval society was often harsh toward women, but prison life had a way of revealing people's true value regardless of their gender. The conversation this morning centers around rumors that a new prisoner will be arriving soon, possibly a knight accused of treason, which would completely upset the current power structure. Knights were trained in combat and accustomed to command, and Thomas is clearly worried about maintaining his authority if someone with military experience joins the group. Historians still argue whether medieval prison hierarchies were based more on physical strength, social status, or practical skills. What's clear is that these internal governments were remarkably sophisticated, with complex systems of trade, justice, and resource allocation that developed organically within the constraints of prison life. The morning social hour also serves as a time for sharing news and rumors from the outside world. Guards occasionally drop hints about political developments. Other prisoners share information they've gleaned from visitors, and everyone speculates about their chances of eventual release. Information is currency in this environment, and even the smallest scrap of news can significantly impact someone's psychological state. As the morning progresses, you find yourself settling into your assigned role within this miniature society. You're not at the top of the hierarchy, but you're not at the bottom either. You've earned a measure of respect through your willingness to share resources and your ability to keep your mouth shut when discretion is called for. In medieval prison, as in the outside world, survival often depends on knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. The sound of multiple footsteps in the corridor signals that today is your turn for questioning. The medieval justice system operated on principles that would seem alien to modern legal minds. The concept of innocent until proven guilty was still centuries away, and the burden of proof often fell on the accused to demonstrate their innocence rather than on the authorities to prove guilt. Two guards appear at your cell door, their faces showing the professional indifference of men who have done this countless times before. They're not here to hurt you, not yet, anyway, but their presence represents the machinery of medieval justice grinding slowly toward some kind of resolution. The key turns in the lock with a sound that's become as familiar as your own heartbeat, and you're ordered to step forward. The walk to the interrogation chamber takes you through corridors you haven't seen before, giving you a brief glimpse of the larger prison complex. Medieval prisons were often built like mazes, with multiple levels, hidden passages, and chambers designed for different purposes. Some were for questioning, others for punishment, and still others for holding prisoners who could afford to pay for better accommodations. The interrogation chamber is a small, windowless room dominated by a heavy wooden table and several chairs. The walls are stone, like everything else in this place, but these stones have been fitted more carefully, creating a space that feels more official and somehow more threatening than your cell. Medieval authorities understood that environment played a crucial role in psychological pressure, and this room has been designed to make you feel small and vulnerable. Your questioner is a clerk of the court, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, and the pale complexion of someone who spends his days reading and writing in dark rooms. He's flanked by two guards and a man you don't recognize, possibly a witness, though in medieval justice, the line between witness and accuser was often blurred. The questioning begins with basic information: your name, your residence, your occupation, and your relationship to the alleged crime. Medieval interrogation techniques relied heavily on psychological pressure rather than physical torture, though the threat of physical punishment was always present. The goal was to get you to confess, because confessions simplified the legal process enormously. If you confessed, there was no need for a lengthy trial, no need to present evidence, and no need to worry about the complicated legal questions that might arise from your case. The questions start simply enough. Where were you on the night in question? Who can vouch for your whereabouts? Do you know the person who accused you? Have you ever been in trouble with the law before? Medieval record keeping was spotty at best. So much of this information couldn't be verified independently. Your word against someone else's word was often the entire case. The clerk takes notes in a careful, deliberate hand, writing down not just your answers, but also his observations about your demeanor, your tone of voice, and your physical reactions to certain questions. Medieval legal theory placed great emphasis on reading the signs of guilt or innocence in a person's behavior, and trained questioners were supposed to be expert at detecting deception. The real purpose of these sessions becomes clear as the questioning continues. They're not really trying to establish facts. They're trying to wear you down, to create doubt and uncertainty in your mind about your own innocence. The process can take hours, with the same questions repeated multiple times in slightly different forms, looking for inconsistencies in your answers. Medieval prisoners often found themselves confessing to crimes they hadn't committed simply to end the psychological torture of repeated questioning. The interrogation process was designed to be exhausting, confusing, and ultimately irresistible. Even innocent people began to question their own memories and motivations under sustained pressure. The threat of physical torture hangs over the entire proceedings like a sword waiting to fall. Medieval torture was legal and common, though it was supposed to be used only as a last resort when other methods failed to produce a confession. The problem was that the definition of last resort was entirely subjective, and different questioners had different standards for when torture became necessary. Historians still argue whether medieval interrogation techniques were more or less effective than modern methods. What's clear is that they were designed to produce confessions rather than establish truth, and the rate of false confessions was probably astronomically high by modern standards. The psychological impact of these sessions extends far beyond the immediate questioning. You return to your cell with your mind racing, replaying every question and every answer, wondering if you said something that could be used against you. The uncertainty is almost worse than the actual questioning, because it continues long after the session is over. Your cellmates can see the strain on your face when you return, and they offer what comfort they can. Margaret brews you a weak tea from herbs she somehow managed to smuggle into the prison, while Thomas shares information about his own interrogation experiences. Medieval prisoners developed strong bonds of mutual support, understanding that they were all facing the same uncertain fate. The afternoon passes slowly as you try to process what happened and what it might mean for your future. Medieval justice was unpredictable at best, and even innocent people could find themselves condemned based on nothing more than suspicion and circumstantial evidence. The waiting is almost as bad as the questioning itself, because it forces you to confront the very real possibility that you might never leave this place alive. The afternoon brings a different kind of misery: forced labor. Medieval prisons operated on the principle that prisoners should contribute to their own upkeep, and that meant working to generate revenue for the prison system. The work assignments varied depending on your skills, your physical condition, and your ability to pay for exemptions, but everyone was expected to contribute something to the prison economy. Your assignment today is in the prison workshop, a large room filled with crude wooden benches and simple tools. The work is making rope from hemp fibers, a tedious process that requires patience and generates revenue for the prison administrators. Medieval rope making was skilled labor in the outside world, but prison rope making was simplified to the point where anyone could do it with minimal training. The chains around your ankles make every movement a calculated effort. Medieval shackles were designed to allow just enough mobility for work while preventing escape, and they succeeded admirably at both goals. The iron cuffs are heavy enough to make walking difficult and sharp enough to cut into your skin if you move too quickly. The connecting chain is just long enough to allow you to take small steps, but not long enough to run or jump. Your work supervisor is a free man who contracts with the prison to manage the labor force. He's paid based on the productivity of his workers, which means he has a vested interest in keeping you working efficiently without actually caring about your welfare. Medieval prison labor was one of the earliest forms of what economists would later call the gig economy, with independent contractors managing workers for specific projects. Hemp fibers are rough and scratchy, and after just a few hours of work, your hands are raw and bleeding. Medieval prisoners often developed permanent scars and calluses from their labor assignments, and hand injuries were common. The work itself is monotonous, taking small bundles of hemp, twisting them together, and slowly building up lengths of rope that will eventually be sold to ships, farms, and other commercial enterprises. The workshop operates on a quota system that would make modern factory managers proud. Each prisoner is expected to produce a certain amount of rope per day, and failure to meet your quota results in reduced food rations or other punishments. The quotas are set just high enough to keep everyone working at maximum capacity, but not so high as to be impossible to achieve. Your fellow workers include a cross-section of medieval society: farmers accused of poaching, merchants charged with fraud, craftsmen who allegedly cheated their guild regulations, and common criminals whose crimes range from theft to assault. The work environment creates a strange camaraderie among people who would never have associated with each other in the outside world. The conversation during work time provides a window into the broader medieval world. You hear stories about political upheavals, economic changes, and social developments that affect everyone, but are experienced differently by people from different social classes. Medieval prisons were inadvertent centers of information exchange, bringing together people from various walks of life who might never have shared their perspectives otherwise. The physical demands of the work are complicated by your deteriorating physical condition. Weeks of poor nutrition, inadequate sleep, and constant stress have left you weaker than you've ever been. Tasks that would have been simple in your previous life now require enormous effort, and you find yourself struggling to keep up with the pace that's expected of you. Medieval work accidents were common and often serious. Without modern safety equipment or medical care, a simple cut or strain could easily become infected or develop into a permanent disability. The workshop is filled with sharp tools, heavy materials, and dangerous machinery, but safety precautions are minimal at best. The afternoon heat makes the work even more difficult. Medieval buildings were designed to retain heat in winter, but that meant they were sweltering in summer. The workshop windows are small and high, providing minimal ventilation, and the combination of body heat from dozens of workers and the physical exertion of rope making creates an oppressive atmosphere. Historians still argue whether medieval prison labor was primarily punitive or economic in nature. What's clear is that it served both purposes effectively, generating revenue for prison administrators while simultaneously breaking down prisoners' resistance and sense of dignity. The work supervisor occasionally walks through the workshop, checking on productivity and quality. He carries a short stick that serves as both measuring device and disciplinary tool, and he's not hesitant to use it when he feels workers are falling behind. Medieval prison discipline was swift and direct, with little concern for due process or proportional response. The rope you're making will eventually be sold to legitimate businesses, creating a strange connection between your imprisonment and the broader medieval economy. Your forced labor is contributing to commerce, transportation, and agriculture, even as you're completely cut off from the benefits of economic activity. As the afternoon progresses, you find yourself falling into the rhythm of the work. It's mindless and repetitive, but it's also a form of meditation that helps distract from the constant anxiety about your legal situation. The physical activity, however limited, feels good after hours of sitting in your cell, and the sense of accomplishment that comes from completing a length of rope provides a small psychological boost. The work period ends when the supervisor announces that the daily quota has been met. The tools are collected, the work areas are cleaned, and the prisoners are prepared for the return journey to their cells. The chains that seemed so heavy at the beginning of the day now feel like permanent parts of your body, and the walk back to your cell is a shuffle rather than a walk. The evening brings the possibility of visitors, and with them, the first real hope you felt all day. Medieval prison visiting policies were complex and often corrupt, but they represented one of the few ways prisoners could maintain connections with the outside world. The sound of voices in the corridor signals that someone has come to see prisoners, though whether that someone is here for you remains to be seen. Your heart races as you hear footsteps approaching your cell, and you're almost afraid to hope that someone has come to visit you. Medieval communication was slow and unreliable, so news of your imprisonment might not have reached your family and friends yet. Even if they knew about your situation, traveling to the prison and securing permission for a visit was expensive and time-consuming. The jailer appears at your cell door with a woman you recognize, your sister Mary, who has somehow managed to make the journey from your home village. The relief you feel at seeing a familiar face is almost overwhelming, and you have to fight back tears as she approaches the bars that separate you. Medieval prison visits were conducted through the cell bars, with no physical contact allowed except in special circumstances. Mary has brought you a small package wrapped in cloth, food from home, a clean shirt, and a letter from your mother. These simple items represent a connection to your previous life that feels more valuable than gold. Medieval prisoners often treasured small personal items from home, not just for their practical value, but for their psychological significance as reminders that they hadn't been completely forgotten by the outside world. The conversation with Mary is awkward and stilted, partly because of the presence of the jailer, who stands close enough to hear every word. Medieval prison visits were rarely private, and guards were always alert for plans of escape, evidence of outside criminal activity, or other information that might be valuable to the authorities. Every word had to be chosen carefully. Mary brings news from home that's both comforting and disturbing. Your mother is ill with worry. Your father is trying to raise money for your legal defense, and your younger brother has been asking when you're coming home. The news from the outside world reminds you how much your imprisonment is affecting not just you, but everyone who cares about you. The practical aspects of your visit focus on legal and financial matters. Mary has spoken with a lawyer who might be willing to take your case, but he requires payment in advance and offers no guarantees about the outcome. Medieval legal representation was expensive and often ineffective, but it was better than facing the justice system alone. The lawyer's fee would represent a significant financial burden for your family, but they're willing to make the sacrifice. Medieval prison visits also served as opportunities for families to assess the prisoner's physical and mental condition. Mary is clearly shocked by your appearance, the weight loss, the pale complexion, the haunted look in your eyes. She tries to hide her reaction, but you can see the concern and fear in her expression as she takes in the full extent of your deterioration. The visiting period is strictly limited, and the jailer makes it clear that time is running out. Medieval prison administrators understood that visits were both a privilege and a form of control. They could be granted or withdrawn as rewards or punishments, and they represented one of the few ways authorities could influence prisoner behavior. Mary's visit also brings news about your case that's both encouraging and terrifying. The person who accused you has been making similar accusations against other people, which might call their credibility into question. On the other hand, the local magistrate is known for his harsh sentences and his belief that it's better to punish the innocent than to let the guilty go free. conversation turns to practical matters about your imprisonment. Mary wants to know if you're getting enough food, if you're being treated well, and if there's anything specific you need. Medieval prison conditions varied widely depending on the prisoner's ability to pay for better treatment, and family support could make the difference between survival and death. The psychological impact of Mary's visit extends far beyond the actual conversation. The knowledge that someone on the outside cares enough to visit, to bring supplies, and to work for your release provides a psychological anchor that helps you maintain hope. Medieval prisoners often spoke of visits as the difference between despair and survival, providing proof that they hadn't been completely forgotten by the world. The jailer announces that visiting time is over and Mary must leave. The goodbye is heartbreaking. You want to reach through the bars to touch her hand, to hug her, to somehow bridge the gap between your world and hers. But the iron bars are unforgiving, and physical contact is forbidden. You watch as she walks away, her footsteps echoing in the corridor until they fade into silence. Back in your cell, you carefully unwrap the package Mary brought. The food, a piece of cheese, some bread that's actually fresh, and a small apple tastes like heaven after weeks of prison fare. Medieval prisoners often saved special food from visits, rationing it carefully to make the psychological comfort last as long as possible. The clean shirt represents more than just fresh clothing. It's a symbol of dignity and connection to your former life. Medieval prisoners often wore the same clothes for weeks or months, and clean clothing was a luxury that reminded you of what it felt like to be human. You change shirts carefully, savoring the feeling of clean fabric against your skin. Your mother's letter is written in her careful, practiced hand, and reading it brings both comfort and pain. She writes about daily life in the village, about neighbors who ask about you, about prayers being said for your safe return. Medieval letter writing was formal and structured, but emotion comes through in every line. She doesn't mention her own suffering, but you can read between the lines and understand the toll your imprisonment is taking on the entire family. The visit has also provided practical information about your legal situation. Mary spoke with several people who might be willing to testify on your behalf, though convincing them to actually appear in court will be another challenge. Medieval witnesses were often reluctant to get involved in legal proceedings, especially when the outcome was uncertain, and the consequences of supporting the wrong side could be severe. Historians still argue whether medieval prison visiting policies were designed to be humane, or were simply practical necessities for gathering information and maintaining control. What's clear is that visits served multiple purposes. They provided emotional support for prisoners, intelligence for authorities, and opportunities for families to assess whether their loved ones were likely to survive their imprisonment. The evening conversation with your cellmates focuses on your visit and what it might mean for your case. Everyone shares their own experiences with visitors, their strategies for maintaining family connections, and their advice about navigating the legal system. Medieval prisoners developed extensive networks of mutual support, sharing information and resources that could mean the difference between life and death. As night approaches, you find yourself holding onto the hope that Mary's visit has brought. The knowledge that people on the outside are working for your release, that you haven't been forgotten, and that there might be a path back to your former life provides the psychological strength you need to face another night in this place. Medieval prison survival was as much about maintaining hope as it was about physical endurance. The evening meal arrives with the familiar scrape of the jailer's key, but tonight feels different because you have real food from home to supplement the prison fare. The contrast between the fresh bread Mary brought and the stale, weevil-infested chunk the jailer slides through the bars is almost comical if you were in any mood for humor. Medieval prison food was notorious for its quality, or lack thereof, and the difference between free world food and prison food was stark enough to serve as its own form of psychological torture. Your cellmates watch with barely concealed hunger as you unwrap the food from your visit. The ethics of sharing in medieval prison were complicated. Everyone understood that food from outside was precious, and that sharing it could mean the difference between maintaining your strength and slowly starving. At the same time, the social dynamics of cell life meant that hoarding food could create tensions that made survival even more difficult. Thomas the Blade makes it clear that he expects his usual percentage of your outside food, just as he takes a cut of any money or supplies that come into the cell. This isn't exactly robbery. It's more like a primitive tax system that funds the informal government that keeps your small society from descending into chaos. Medieval prison survival often depended on these informal social contracts that balanced individual needs with group stability. You decide to share the apple with the group, cutting it into small pieces with a sharp stone that someone has carefully shaped into a crude knife. The apple is sweet and crisp, a reminder of what food is supposed to taste like when it's fresh and grown in sunlight. Medieval prisoners often spoke of fresh fruit as one of the things they missed most, not just for its taste, but for what it represented about the world beyond prison walls. The cheese becomes a more complicated negotiation. It's valuable enough to significantly improve your nutrition, but sharing it widely would mean everyone gets too little to make a real difference. You end up trading small pieces for various services, information about the legal system, help with mending your clothes, and promises of support if you face challenges from other prisoners. The regular prison supper consists of more of the same watery porridge you had for breakfast, supplemented with a thin soup that might contain actual vegetables if you're lucky. Medieval prison cooks were masters of making small amounts of food stretch as far as possible, and the techniques they used would make modern food scientists weep with admiration. Unfortunately, nutritional value was sacrificed for volume, and the result was food that filled your stomach without actually nourishing your body. The soup tonight contains what appears to be cabbage, though it's been cooked so long that it's lost most of its nutritional value and taken on the consistency of wet paper. Medieval understanding of nutrition was limited, and prison cooks often believed that cooking vegetables for hours made them more digestible, when in fact it destroyed most of their vitamins and minerals. Water remains a constant concern, and the evening water ration is even more precious than the food. The bucket in your cell contains water that's been sitting since morning, and by evening, it's developed a distinct taste that suggests bacterial growth. Medieval prisoners often developed elaborate theories about which water was safe to drink, though most of these theories were based on superstition rather than actual knowledge of water purification. The eating process itself has become a ritual that helps mark the passage of time and provides structure to days that otherwise blur together in an endless cycle of misery. Medieval prisoners often spoke of mealtimes as the most important events of their day, not just because of the food, but because they represented moments when the outside world acknowledged their existence. Your cellmates share stories about the best meals they've ever had, a bittersweet form of entertainment that helps pass the time while simultaneously reminding everyone of what they've lost. Margaret describes a harvest feast from her village, with fresh bread, roasted meat, and vegetables from her own garden. The merchant Robert talks about elaborate meals he shared with other traders, featuring exotic spices and dishes from distant lands. The conversation inevitably turns to speculation about when you might be able to eat real food again. Medieval legal proceedings were notoriously slow, and prisoners often spent months or even years waiting for their cases to be resolved. The uncertainty about when your imprisonment might end makes every meal feel like it could be one of your last, adding psychological weight to the simple act of eating. Historians still argue whether medieval prison food was intentionally designed to be inadequate, or if it was simply the result of limited budgets and poor understanding of nutrition. What's clear is that malnutrition was a constant threat, and prisoners who survived long-term imprisonment often emerged with permanent health problems related to their diet. The evening meal also serves as a time for sharing information about the day's events. Thomas reports on conversations he's had with guards. Margaret shares news from other cells, and everyone discusses rumors about changes in prison policy or legal procedures. Medieval prisons were surprisingly effective communication networks, with information flowing between cells and even between different prisons through various unofficial channels. As the meal concludes, you find yourself calculating how to ration the remaining food from Mary's visit. The bread will last 2 days if you're careful. The cheese might stretch to 3 days, and the psychological comfort of having something from home will last even longer. Medieval prisoners became expert at making small pleasures last as long as possible, understanding that hope was often more important than nutrition for long-term survival. The cleanup after supper is a communal effort that helps maintain the minimal hygiene standards that keep disease from spreading too quickly. Medieval prisoners understood that their health was interconnected. Disease in one person could quickly spread to everyone in the confined space. The wooden bowls are scraped clean and stacked in the corner. The eating area is swept with a makeshift broom, and the leftover scraps are disposed of through the small drain that serves multiple purposes. As darkness begins to fall, the prison transforms into a different kind of nightmare. Medieval buildings were designed around the rhythm of natural light, and when the sun disappeared, the prison became a place of shadows, strange sounds, and unnamed fears. The single candle that occasionally illuminates your cell is a luxury that must be earned or paid for, and most nights you're left in complete darkness to face whatever terrors your imagination can conjure. The sounds of the prison at night are enough to drive anyone to madness. Medieval buildings were excellent at conducting sound, and the stone walls and corridors create an acoustic environment where every noise is amplified and distorted. You hear the moans of prisoners in other cells, the scurrying of rats in the walls, the drip of water from somewhere in the darkness, and the occasional cry of someone having a nightmare. Your cellmates huddle together for warmth and comfort, but the darkness makes everyone seem like strangers. Medieval prisons were breeding grounds for paranoia, and the combination of stress, malnutrition, and sleep deprivation created conditions where rational thinking became increasingly difficult. The person who was your ally during the day might seem threatening in the darkness, and trust became a luxury that few could afford. The cold is worse at night, seeping through the stone walls and floor until it feels like it's penetrating your bones. Medieval buildings had no insulation, and the thermal mass of stone meant that the prison stayed cold long after the outside temperature had warmed. Your thin prison clothes provide minimal protection, and the shared body heat of your cellmates is often the only thing that keeps you from freezing. The psychological impact of nighttime in medieval prison was profound. Darkness activated primitive fears that civilized society had taught people to suppress, and the confined space made it impossible to escape from your own terror. Medieval prisoners often spoke of night as the most difficult time to endure, when the absence of visual stimulation forced them to confront their own thoughts and fears. Sleep becomes a negotiation between exhaustion and terror. Your body is desperate for rest, but your mind is hyper-alert to every sound and shadow. Medieval prisoners often developed elaborate sleep rituals, specific positions, mental exercises, or prayer routines that helped them transition from wakefulness to sleep. The lack of proper bedding meant that finding a comfortable position was nearly impossible, and most sleep was fitful and interrupted. The rats emerge in full force once darkness falls, scurrying across the floor and sometimes across sleeping prisoners. Medieval prisons were infested with rodents that carried diseases and competed with prisoners for food scraps. The sound of their claws on stone, their squeaking communication, and their occasional bold explorations of human territory added another layer of stress to an already unbearable situation. Strange sounds from other parts of the prison filter through the walls, sometimes screams, sometimes laughter, sometimes singing, and sometimes sounds that defy identification. Medieval prisons housed people with various forms of mental illness, and the stress of imprisonment often pushed marginally stable individuals into complete breakdown. The sounds of human suffering in the darkness created an atmosphere of dread that affected everyone. The darkness also brought supernatural fears that were very real to medieval minds. Most people believed in ghosts, demons, and other spiritual entities that were supposedly more active at night. Medieval prisons were often built on sites with violent histories, and prisoners convinced themselves that they could sense the presence of those who had died in the same cells. Whether these fears were rational or not, they were psychologically real and added to the terror of nighttime imprisonment. Your bladder becomes an urgent concern as the night progresses. The communal toilet corner is even more disgusting in the darkness, and navigating to it without stepping on cellmates or slipping on wet stone requires careful coordination. Medieval prisoners often developed bladder problems from trying to avoid nighttime trips to the latrine, but the alternative was even worse. The guard's occasional night rounds provide brief moments of light from his torch, but they also bring their own terrors. Medieval guards were often drunk or looking for excuses to abuse prisoners, and the darkness gave them cover for activities that they might not attempt during daylight hours. The sound of approaching footsteps could signal anything from a routine check to a violent assault. Historians still argue whether medieval prison conditions were intentionally designed to be psychologically traumatic, or if they were simply the result of limited technology and resources. What's clear is that the nighttime experience was so consistently horrible that it became a form of torture in itself, breaking down prisoners' mental resistance as effectively as any physical punishment. The passage of time becomes impossible to track in the darkness. Medieval prisoners had no clocks, no way to see the position of the sun or stars, and no regular schedule to mark the hours. Minutes felt like hours felt like days, and the night seemed to stretch on forever. Time distortion was one of the most disorienting aspects of medieval prison life, making it difficult to maintain any sense of normal human rhythm. Your mind begins to play tricks on you in the darkness. Shadows seem to move independently. Sounds become distorted into threatening messages, and your imagination fills in details that may or may not be real. Medieval prisoners often spoke of hallucinations and waking dreams that seemed more vivid than reality, and the line between sleep and wakefulness became increasingly blurred. The darkness also provides cover for activities that couldn't happen during the day. Cellmates might share intimate fears, make plans for escape, or engage in activities that would be impossible under the jailer's watchful eye. Medieval prison nights were times when the normal social rules were suspended, and relationships between prisoners could become more complex and intense. As the night deepens, you find yourself longing for dawn with an intensity that surprises you. The promise of light, even the dim light that filters through your small window, becomes a goal that helps you endure the hours of darkness. Medieval prisoners often spoke of sunrise as a daily miracle, a reminder that the world beyond prison walls still existed, and that another day of survival was possible. The middle of the night brings a different kind of torment, the hours when your body is exhausted, but your mind refuses to rest. Medieval prisoners often developed chronic insomnia, caught between physical exhaustion and psychological terror. The stone floor has become familiar beneath your body, every bump and irregularity mapped by weeks of restless nights, but comfort remains elusive. Your mind races through the events of the day, replaying conversations with the interrogator, analyzing every word for hidden meanings or implications. Medieval legal proceedings were so unpredictable that prisoners often drove themselves to distraction, trying to understand what their questioners really wanted. The interrogation sessions were designed to create this kind of mental torment, keeping prisoners off balance and uncertain about their fate. The physical discomfort of your sleeping position becomes a form of meditation, forcing you to focus on immediate sensations rather than long-term fears. Your hip bones ache against the stone, your shoulder is numb from lying on your side, and your neck is stiff from using bundled clothes as a pillow. Medieval prisoners often developed permanent physical problems from sleeping on hard surfaces, but the immediate concern is simply getting through the night. Margaret's soft snoring provides an oddly comforting rhythm in the darkness. Medieval prisoners often found solace in the simple evidence that other people were managing to sleep, proof that rest was possible even in these conditions. The sound of her breathing becomes an anchor point in the sensory chaos of the night, something normal and human in an environment designed to strip away humanity. Your thoughts drift to your family, and you wonder what they're doing at this exact moment. Are they asleep in their comfortable beds, or are they lying awake worrying about you? Medieval communication was so slow that your family might not even know the current status of your case. The knowledge that people who love you are suffering because of your imprisonment adds another layer of guilt to your already overwhelming emotional burden. The sound of someone crying in another cell drifts through the walls, a heartbreaking reminder that you're not alone in your suffering. Medieval prisons were filled with people experiencing the worst moments of their lives, and the thin walls ensured that everyone's misery was shared. The crying continues for what feels like hours, eventually tapering off into exhausted silence. Your stomach growls audibly, reminding you that the evening meal was hours ago, and that hunger has become a constant companion. Medieval prisoners often spoke of hunger as a living thing that grew stronger at night, when there were fewer distractions from the physical sensation of emptiness. The apple you shared earlier feels like a distant memory, and your body craves the nutrition it's been denied. The darkness plays tricks with your perception of time. What feels like hours might be minutes, or what seems like a brief moment might actually be most of the night. Medieval prisoners had no reliable way to track time, and the psychological impact of temporal disorientation was almost as difficult as the physical discomfort. A fight breaks out in a nearby cell, with shouts and the sound of bodies hitting walls. Medieval prison violence was common, especially at night when guards were less likely to intervene quickly. The sounds of conflict create a spike of adrenaline that makes sleep even more impossible, and you find yourself listening intently for signs that the violence might spread to your cell. The guards eventually respond to the disturbance, their torch light creating wild shadows that dance across your cell walls. Medieval prison discipline was swift and brutal, and the sounds of punishment being administered serve as a reminder of what happens to prisoners who step out of line. The incident ends with someone being dragged away, destination unknown. Your thoughts turn to escape, as they do every night. You've mentally mapped every inch of your cell, tested every bar, examined every stone for weaknesses. Medieval prison escapes were rare, but not impossible, and prisoners spent countless hours planning elaborate schemes that usually had no chance of success. The mental exercise of planning and escape provides a form of psychological relief, even when the plans are completely unrealistic. The cold seems to intensify as the night progresses, and you pull your thin blanket tighter around your shoulders. Medieval buildings had no heating systems, and the stone walls actually made the interior colder than the outside air. Your cellmates unconsciously move closer together in sleep, seeking shared warmth that might help everyone survive until morning. A rat runs across your leg, and you jerk awake from the light doze you'd finally achieved. Medieval prisoners learned to coexist with rodents, but the surprise of unexpected contact always triggered a fear response. The rat is probably more afraid of you than you are of it, but in the darkness, every unexpected sensation feels threatening. Your mind drifts to philosophical questions about justice, punishment, and human nature. Medieval imprisonment provided plenty of time for contemplation, and many prisoners emerged from their experience with radically changed perspectives on life and society. The immediate concerns of survival gradually give way to deeper questions about the meaning of suffering and the nature of human resilience. The sound of a church bell tolling in the distance provides a brief connection to the outside world. Medieval cities were organized around religious schedules, and the bells that marked prayer times served as a reminder that life continued beyond the prison walls. The sound is both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of the community and routine that you've lost. Historians still argue whether medieval prison conditions were intentionally designed to break prisoners psychologically, or if they were simply the result of limited resources and understanding of human needs. What's clear is that the combination of physical discomfort, social isolation, and temporal disorientation created a perfect storm of psychological pressure that few people could endure indefinitely. As the night drags on, you find yourself entering a state that's neither fully awake nor truly asleep. Medieval prisoners often spoke of this twilight consciousness, where the boundaries between dreams and reality became blurred. In this state, memories, fantasies, and fears blend together in ways that can be both terrifying and oddly comforting. In the deepest part of the night, when the prison has settled into its most profound quiet, your mind enters a strange state of clarity that that seems to come only during these dark hours. Medieval prisoners often spoke of midnight as a time when the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds became thin, when thoughts and dreams took on a life of their own. Your memories begin to surface with unexpected vividness. You remember summer afternoons in your village, the smell of bread baking in your mother's oven, the feel of sun on your face as you worked in the fields. These memories are so clear and detailed that they feel more real than your current surroundings, providing a form of escape that's more effective than any physical comfort. The dream state that comes with exhaustion brings its own strange gifts. You find yourself walking through familiar places, talking to people you haven't seen in years, eating meals that taste better than any food you've ever actually consumed. Medieval prisoners often spoke of dreams as visits to another world, and the line between dreaming and waking became increasingly blurred during long nights of fitful sleep. Your father appears in your dreams, not as he was when you last saw him, but as he was when you were a child. He's teaching you to use a scythe, his patient voice explaining the rhythm of cutting grain, his strong hands guiding yours on the wooden handle. The dream is so vivid that you can smell the grain dust and feel the weight of the tool in your hands. The dream shifts, and you're at your sister's wedding, watching her dance with her new husband while the whole village celebrates. The music is lively, the food is abundant, and everyone is laughing and talking. You try to join the celebration, but no matter how hard you try, you can't seem to reach the other people. You're always just outside the circle of light and warmth, watching but not participating. Medieval dream interpretation was a complex subject that combined religious theology, folk wisdom, and personal experience. Most people believed that dreams were messages from God, the devil, or the spirits of the dead, and prisoners often spent hours trying to decode the meaning of their nighttime visions. Your dreams about home and family might be seen as signs of hope, warnings about danger, or simply the mind's way of processing loss and grief. The sound of someone talking in their sleep drifts from another part of the cell. Medieval prisoners often suffered from nightmares that caused them to cry out, talk, or even walk in their sleep. The confined space meant that everyone's sleep disturbances affected everyone else, creating a cycle of interrupted rest that made psychological problems worse. Your dreams turn darker, reflecting the fears and anxieties that dominate your waking hours. You're standing in a courtroom, but the judge's face is hidden in shadows, and the witnesses against you are people you've never seen before. They're speaking in a language you don't understand, but somehow you know they're saying terrible things about you. You try to defend yourself, but no words come from your mouth. The nightmare continues with you being led to a scaffold, but instead of a quick death, you find yourself back in your cell, starting the same day over again. The cyclical nature of prison life creates a psychological trap where each day feels like a repetition of the previous one, with no progress and no hope of change. Medieval prisoners often developed elaborate fantasy worlds that provided escape from their harsh reality. In your half-sleeping state, you You construct detailed scenarios where you're free, where you're proven innocent, where you're reunited with your family. These fantasies are both blessing and curse. They provide psychological relief, but also highlight the vast gap between hope and reality. The dream state also brings unexpected insights about your situation. Freed from the constraints of waking logic, your mind makes connections between seemingly unrelated events, sees patterns that might help your case, or develops strategies for survival that you wouldn't have considered during daylight hours. Medieval prisoners often spoke of receiving important revelations during their dreams, though separating genuine insights from wishful thinking was always challenging. Your mother appears in your dreams, but she's younger than you remember, the way she looked when you were very small. She's singing a lullaby that you haven't heard in years, her voice soft and comforting. The dream is so peaceful that you try to stay asleep, to remain in this place where love and security still exist. The transition between dreams and waking becomes increasingly fluid. You're not sure if you're remembering real events, imagining possible futures, or experiencing something that exists only in the strange world of prison sleep. Medieval prisoners often spoke of losing the ability to distinguish between memory and dream, between hope and reality. Historians still argue whether medieval prisoners' reports of prophetic dreams and spiritual visions were genuine religious experiences, or simply the result of malnutrition, sleep deprivation, and psychological stress. What's clear is that the dream life of prisoners was often more vivid and meaningful than their waking hours, providing a form of psychological survival that helped them endure their circumstances. The darkness begins to seem less threatening as you drift between sleep and wakefulness. Medieval prisoners often spoke of reaching a state of acceptance during the deepest part of the night, when the immediate fears of the day gave way to a broader understanding of their situation. This acceptance wasn't resignation. It was a form of psychological adaptation that made survival possible. Your dreams begin to incorporate elements of your current reality, blending memories of home with the harsh facts of prison life. You're eating dinner with your family, but the food is prison gruel, and the conversation is about legal procedures and court dates. The dream world and the real world are becoming integrated in ways that reflect your psychological adaptation to imprisonment. As the night deepens, you find yourself entering a state that's almost meditative. The physical discomfort becomes background noise. The fears about your future become distant concerns, and you exist in a moment of strange peace. Medieval prisoners often spoke of finding spiritual insights during their darkest hours, and whether these insights were genuine or simply psychological coping mechanisms, they provided real comfort. The sound of your own breathing becomes a focal point, a reminder that you're still alive, still fighting, still hoping. Medieval prisoners often developed breathing techniques that helped them manage anxiety and find moments of calm. The simple act of controlling your breath becomes a form of rebellion against the forces that are trying to break you. The first hint of dawn creeps through your small window, not actual sunlight, but the subtle shift from absolute darkness to the deep gray that signals the approaching morning. Medieval prisoners became extraordinarily sensitive to these small changes in light, since they represented the only reliable way to track the passage of time. The promise of another day brings both relief and dread. Relief that you've survived another night. Dread that you must face another day of uncertainty. Your body aches in familiar ways as you shift position on the stone floor. The night has left its mark in stiff joints, cramped muscles, and a bone-deep weariness that goes beyond simple fatigue. Medieval prisoners often described a specific type of exhaustion that came from sleeping on stone, a tiredness that rest couldn't cure because rest itself was so inadequate. The other prisoners in your cell begin to stir, each one emerging from their own private battles with sleep, dreams, and darkness. Medieval prison cells were inadvertent laboratories for studying human resilience, and every morning brought proof that people could endure conditions that seemed impossible to survive. The fact that you're all still alive, still conscious, still capable of greeting another day, is a small miracle that none of you takes for granted. Thomas the Blade is already awake, as he always is before the others. Medieval prison survival often depended on maintaining routines that provided structure and purpose, and Thomas has made himself indispensable by serving as the cell's unofficial timekeeper and organizer. His quiet movements as he prepares for another day create a rhythm that helps everyone else transition from night to morning. The sound of stirring throughout the prison creates a symphony of human persistence. Medieval prisons were communities of suffering, but they were also communities of survival, where people who had never met before learned to support each other through the worst experiences of their lives. The morning sounds, coughing, stretching, quiet conversations represent the daily miracle of human endurance. Your thoughts turn to the day ahead, and you mentally prepare for another round of uncertainty, discomfort, and small victories. Medieval prisoners became experts at managing their expectations, learning to hope for tiny improvements while preparing for significant setbacks. The art of psychological survival required a delicate balance between optimism and realism. The memory of Mary's visit yesterday provides a foundation of hope that helps you face the approaching day. Medieval prisoners often spoke of visits as lifelines that kept them connected to the world beyond prison walls, and the knowledge that someone on the outside cares about your fate makes the daily struggle seem worthwhile. The clean shirt she brought still smells faintly of home, a reminder that another world exists beyond these stone walls. The gradual increase in light reveals the familiar details of your cell, the stains on the walls, the sleeping forms of your cellmates, the small pile of possessions that represents everything you own in the world. Medieval prisoners often developed intense relationships with their physical surroundings, memorizing every detail of their confined space until it became as familiar as their own bodies. The approaching dawn also brings the return of specific fears and anxieties that darkness had temporarily subdued. Medieval legal proceedings were unpredictable, and every new day brought the possibility of interrogation, trial, or punishment. The uncertainty about your fate creates a constant state of psychological tension that makes even simple activities feel charged with significance. Your stomach reminds you that it's been hours since your last meal, and you begin to calculate how to ration the remaining food from Mary's visit. Medieval prisoners became experts at food management, learning to make small amounts last as long as possible while maintaining enough nutrition to survive. The piece of cheese wrapped in cloth represents not just food, but hope, comfort, and connection to the outside world. The morning ritual of awakening provides a brief moment of normalcy in an otherwise abnormal existence. Medieval prisoners often spoke of morning routines as anchors that helped them maintain their sense of identity and purpose. The simple act of greeting the day, of choosing to continue fighting for survival, becomes a form of resistance against the forces that are trying to break you. Historians still argue whether medieval prison conditions were intentionally designed to be rehabilitative, punitive, or simply custodial. What's clear is that the experience of imprisonment was so intense and traumatic that it changed people in fundamental ways, often leaving them with perspectives on life, justice, and human nature that they could never have developed in normal circumstances. The sound of the jailer's key in the outer door signals the beginning of another day's routine. Medieval prison life was governed by rhythms and rituals that provided structure in an otherwise chaotic existence. The approaching breakfast, the work assignments, the possibility of visitors, all of these elements combine to create a framework that makes survival possible. As you prepare to face another day, you find yourself drawing strength from sources you never knew existed. Medieval prisoners often discovered reserves of courage, patience, and hope that surprised them, learning that human beings are capable of enduring far more than they ever imagined. The approaching dawn represents not just the end of another difficult night, but the beginning of another opportunity to prove that you can survive whatever this experience demands of you. The gradual lightening of the sky through your small window creates a sense of renewal that feels almost miraculous after the long night of darkness. Medieval prisoners often spoke of dawn as a daily resurrection, a reminder that the world continues to turn, that life continues to exist, and that hope remains possible even in the most desperate circumstances. Your cellmates begin to engage in the quiet conversations that mark the transition from night to day. Medieval prison cells were intimate spaces where people learned to share their deepest fears and hopes, creating bonds that were both necessary for survival and unlike anything they had experienced in the outside world. The morning conversations often focused on practical matters, food, health, legal developments, but they also provided emotional support that helped everyone face another day. The approaching morning brings with it the familiar mixture of routine and uncertainty that defines prison life. You know what the day will bring in terms of schedule and activities, but you never know what unexpected developments might change everything. Medieval prisoners learned to live with constant uncertainty, developing psychological strategies that helped them cope with the stress of never knowing what would happen next. As the light continues to grow stronger, you find yourself settling into the rhythm of another day. The night's dreams and fears begin to fade, replaced by the immediate concerns of survival and the small hopes that make each day bearable. Medieval prison life was a testament to human resilience, showing that people could adapt to circumstances that seemed impossible to endure. The dawn light reveals the faces of your cellmates, each one marked by the experience of imprisonment, but still recognizably human, still capable of kindness and hope. Medieval prisons brought together people from all walks of life, creating communities that transcended the social barriers that normally separated people. The shared experience of suffering had a way of revealing the fundamental humanity that connects all people. And so another day begins in your medieval prison cell, with its mixture of routine and uncertainty, hope and fear, suffering and survival. You've made it through another night, and that simple fact represents a victory that no one who hasn't lived through this experience could fully understand. The approaching day will bring new challenges, new small victories, new reasons to continue fighting for your freedom and your life. The cycle continues, as it has for countless days and will for countless more, until either justice or mercy finally intervenes. But for now, in this moment, as the light grows stronger and the prison begins to wake up around you, you're still alive, still hoping, still human. And in the harsh world of medieval imprisonment, that's more than enough reason to face whatever this new day might bring. The light continues to grow stronger now, washing over the stone walls with a gentle warmth that feels like a blessing after the long night of darkness. You've witnessed 24 hours in one of history's most brutal environments, and somehow, against all odds, you've survived. The human spirit, it seems, is more resilient than we often give it credit for. As you settle back into your own comfortable bed, in your own safe space, take a moment to appreciate the simple luxuries that surround you. The soft mattress beneath your body, the clean sheets against your skin, the warmth of your room, the knowledge that tomorrow will bring choices and freedoms that our medieval prisoner could never imagine. These aren't just comforts, they're miracles that most of human history never experienced. Let your breathing slow down now. Let your body sink deeper into the safety of your modern world. The stone walls of that medieval cell are centuries away. The hunger and cold and fear are just memories from a story. And you're here now, surrounded by peace and possibility. The struggles of that long ago prisoner remind us that humans have always found ways to survive, to hope, to maintain their dignity, even in the darkest circumstances. There's something deeply comforting about that knowledge, something that speaks to the unbreakable core of human resilience that lives within all of us. As you drift toward sleep, carry with you not the fear or the discomfort of that medieval cell, but the quiet strength of someone who faced the impossible and found a way to endure. Let that strength become part of your own story, a reminder that whatever challenges you face in your own life, you have within you the same capacity for survival, the same ability to find hope in darkness, the same fundamental human courage that has carried people through the worst of times for thousands of years. Sleep well, knowing that you're safe, that you're free, and that tomorrow will bring new possibilities. The medieval prisoner story has ended for tonight, but yours continues, filled with all the potential that freedom brings. Rest now and dream of better days.